As some of you may know, that Nebraska is the only state in the United States that elects their beef board members, their Nebraska Beef Council members. All the rest of them are appointed by organizations. So Nebraska gets elected. I got elected 8 years ago. I put 8 years in there, and then Secretary Vilsack nominated me for the national board, and I've had 2 years in there. And some people wonder how this guy made it there. It's because of elections. It's because of elections. So I'd like you to buckle your seatbelts because we're going to go fast on this one. I want to give you just a quick history of how we got to where we are, where this checkoff came from. Some of you may know Bob Taylor. He's a professor of agriculture at Auburn University. When I was attended the OCM convention, he was talking about things that happened in the past, and it struck me. He filled in a piece that I had been missing in the history of the checkoff. So when we start, you'll find out that there was the Farmers' Revolt back at the turn of the century, and this come out of the Farmers' Revolt, the Sherman Antitrust Law Act and the Clayton Act. Then in 1919, we had the Consent Decree, and the Consent Decree, the Packers agreed to sell their interest in stockyards, warehouses, and wholesale and retail meat. Then in 1921, the Packers and Stockyard Act, and it's prohibited packers from engaging in unfair, deceptive practices, giving undue preference to persons and localities. Stockyards were forbidden dealing in the livestock they handle, and only stockyards with pens with spaces larger than 20,000 feet were affected by the Packers and Stockyard Act. Now, look what happens now. You see, there was some things that took place that started squeezing them packers into a box, and Thomas Wilson comes up with this great idea. Let's have a checkoff. You didn't know it started in 1921, did you? The beef checkoff started in 1921, and what it was 5 cents per carload. There's 25 head in a carload, and the packers would match that 5 cents. The assessment was collected at the markets. The assessment was refundable. And that first year, they collected $20,000 or $70,000. And I should sit down and figure out what $70,000 was in 1922 as compared to today. But sometime I'll get around to that. Wilson Thomas led the way to establish, this is important, the National Livestock and Meats Board to administrate the checkoff. And it was for all species. It was for beef, pork, and lamb. In 1931, they doubled it. It went to 25 cents per carload, which come out to a penny per head. And the packers matched it again. In 1953, it increased again to 2 cents per head. In 1955, the National Beef Council was formed. And what the Nebraska National Beef Council was, the Texas Farm Bureau led the way for the National Beef Council. What they did was they had 17 states form their own state beef councils, and those 17 states supported the National Beef Council. And producers, and it had to be voluntary. It wasn't refundable. You had to voluntarily fork over your money to help this one out. The National Livestock and Meats Board was still also going, with Wilson Thomas's version of a checkoff, and it's refundable. So they took your money at the market, and you had to ask to get it back. 1962, it increased to 3 cents per head. 1963, the National Beef Council goes broke. They couldn't meet obligations for advertising. This is what I was told from John Houston, who used to run the Beef Industry Council. He said that the National Beef Council went broke. The 17 states then joined the National Livestock and Meats Board. Those 17 states went and joined the Packers, refundable assessment. And at that time, when that happened, they broke it up into groups. Now we have the Beef Industry Council for just beef dollars, the Pork Industry Group for just pork, and a Lamb Committee. So they broke the species up in 1963. From 63 to 75, there were 7 checkoffs that failed in Congress. All were opposed by the National Livestock and Meats Board and Farm Bureau. Of course, because they already had a lock on it. They got a refundable one that they got control over. In 1976, they passed the law that started the checkoff that we have today. So we had a referendum. There were 1 million potential voters. 231,000 voted 130 voted yes, but you had to have 2/3 majority for it to pass. So it only got 56%. The referendum failed, and the vote was taken at the county extension office. 1980, they tried it again. And this time, there's still 1 million potential voters, only 230,000 vote, 79,000 voted in favor, and they changed it from 2/3 majority to just a simple majority. Well, it failed again, only 34%. And the vote again was taken at the county extension office. All right, so in 1985, they go back, they take this law and they revamp it a little bit and run it through the farm bill, and it comes out, and we have a referendum in 88. This time we have 1 million potential voters again, 256,000 voted, 200,000 voted in favor. It was still a simple majority. 79% voted in favor or passed it, and it was moved from the extension office to the ASCS office. 20% of the producers, eligible producers, passed this law. 20%. Isn't it ironic how they changed the voting procedure, and then they finally changed the venue, and they finally got what they want? And we haven't had a referendum since then, because once it's in place, it's in place. All right, from 1988 to 1986, before NCBA merged with the Beef Industry Council, as the Beef Industry Council was the #1 contractor. They won most of the contracts. The National Livestock and Meats Board was second. Well, that only stands to reason because the National Livestock and Meats Board is the mother group, and the Beef Industry Council is a subsidiary, as was pork and as was lamb. But the National Cattlemen's Association was the third contractor, and they only got $5 million. In 1992, something interesting happened. The pork industry group broke away from the National Livestock and Meats Board, and so did the Lamb Committee. So all that left was this Beef Industry Council sitting there. National Cattlemen started talking about a merger with National Livestock and Meats Board. In 1994, and I found this last year at Christmas time, you just playing around on the internet, the Senate had a hearing to which Senator Feingold got Bob Drake on the stand and really put it to him. And he wanted to know how many how many employees NC had. And of course, Bob says, I don't know. So you got to go through the whole darn thing, get to the end where they submit back to written testimony to find this. 1985, 1987, NC only had 45 employees. That's prior to the checkoff. 93, all of a sudden NC's got 80 employees. See what a little checkoff dollars does for you? 1993, NC's budget, they got $5 million from checkoff. 56% of their budget was non-checkoff, which was $6.9 million. In the summer of 1995, there were 8 amendments to the Cattlemen's Beef Board bylaws. And in those eight amendments to their bylaws, this was in July, they formed joint committees to decide where dollars get spent. They said that the summer and annual meeting had to be held with a nonprofit industry group. January, 6 months later, NCBA is formed. 6 months. Doesn't that seem kind of convenient? The bylaws get changed, and NCBA is formed. The National Livestock and Meats Board merges with National Cattlemen and the Beef Industry Council, and the Beef Industry Council becomes the Federation of State Beef Councils. The Federation is a non-legal entity. It does not exist. It's a wholly owned subsidiary of NCBA. They do not have what do you call those, 990s? Is that the tax? Yeah, they do not have a 990. The Federation consists of 45 state beef councils. 5 states are too small to have beef councils. And of the directors on the state beef, there's 660 directors on all those beef councils. Of those 660, 85 of them become Federation directors. Now this is going to be important here in a little bit. It's a pay-to-play game is what it is. They set up a pay program based on the number of cattle in your state and the population. So if you're a high cattle, low population, you have a different pay schedule if you're high population, low cattle. So like Nebraska, for example, the first seats 1 through 3 cost $34,000 a piece. Seats 4 and 5 cost 2.5% of our budget, and our budget was $10 million. That's $250,000 a seat. Seats 6 and up are 5%, are 5% of the budget. That's $500,000 for those seats. The Federation collects about $10 million through these seats. $10 million. In 2010, we were having a heated discussion, and I stood up and I said, I'd like to have a show of hands of how many in this room are NCBA dues-paying members. Everybody's hands went up. So I said, let me rephrase that. How many in this room are not dues-paying NCBA members? 3. 3 of us. So I suggested that the rest of them probably shouldn't vote because they have a conflict of interest. That didn't go very far. 2008, NCBA is going strong. Remember how many they had 45 back in 85? 2008, they had 126 employees. 70% of NCBA's budget, $37 million, is from the checkoff. Is from the checkoff. Forrest Roberts is CEO. 70% of that is paid by checkoff dollars. Because, see, he is the CEO of NCBA, and the Federation is a non-legal entity that's a subsidiary of NCBA. So when they start divvying out how that works, whatever time he puts in on checkoff, he gets checkoff dollars. Whatever time he puts in on NCBA policy, he gets NCBA dollars. It's a 70-30 split. All right, my question here is, are we going the wrong direction? In 1985, there were 1 million beef producers and there were 34 million head of cows. Today, there's 750,000 beef producers and only 30 million cows. I would bet that 30 million is less than that today, just from the last year. Here's the shocker. NC in 94 had 40,000 members. Today they got 26. They can't even see that it's going the wrong direction. This is the opening paragraph of the Beef Promotion and Research Act. It says to enable cattle producers to establish, finance, and carry out a coordinated program of research, producer and consumer information, and promote and to improve, maintain, and develop markets for cattle, beef and beef products. My daughter says that I'm too intense, so she had to throw this in at the end. So that's a fast history of the checkoff. Now, the reason I touched back on the Federation, when the operating committee decides who spends the dollars, and the operating committee consists of 10 CBB members and 10 Federation members. Do you see how NCBA wins those contracts? 10 of those votes are in their back pocket, right off the bat. All right, so this is this is one of the changes that took place last year. I'm on the evaluation committee. I get to evaluate these projects. We do 2 or 3 projects a year. And we do an evaluation, but the funding for the next year starts before we get the evaluation done. I've said, that's like preg checking cows a week after you put the cows out with the bull. I mean, why would you sell her? She might get bred next year. Or she might already be bred. That's the way it works. The evaluations take place. By the time we're finished with the evaluation, the funding has already been put in place for the next year. Or it'd be like having a fencing crew come work to put in your fence. And part of the contract is you don't get to see the evaluation until after you sign next year's contract. So therefore, the contractor for the year can adjust his working ethic to meet your evaluation. So therefore, where does another contractor ever get the opportunity to enter into the contract? It's rather difficult. It's almost impossible. All right, so these are committee changes that took place this year, and if you can read that, you can see the committee says, it says Global Consumer and Marketing Group, and underneath that is advertising, food service, retail, veal. Then over here is research. It says beef safety, producer enhancement, product enhancement, I'm sorry, human and nutrition. Okay, and then down in the corner it says public opinion, producer, does that say producer enhancement, Graham?
Producer education.
Producer education is what it says, public relations. Okay, those are the old committees. Now in my mind, I can see an evaluation on that and try to figure out where that money's going. A year ago, when we're out of money, I mean, they're running short on money. So I made the suggestion that when you're going broke, what you got to do is you got to call that herd and you got to call them hard. I said what we need to do is we need to break this into 3 groups, which you already got the 3 groups, but I'm suggesting let's evaluate this entire group, and no funding goes by until that evaluation's done. Then the next year that one, the next year that one, the third year we're back to this one again. So that was my suggestion. Now I'm telling you, they listen to you, but they don't always, they listen to you, they take your idea and then they, shall we say, adulterate it. Now, these are our new committees. Freedom to Operate Committee. How are you going to evaluate freedom to operate? How are you going to write a contract for freedom to operate? How is a new contractor going to step in and even try to write a contract for freedom to operate? Beef Image Committee. Joint Global Growth Committee. Joint Domestic Preference Committee. Joint Convenience Subcommittees. Joint Safety Subcommittee. Joint Value Subcommittee. Joint Nutrition Health. Now that one you might be able to evaluate. You know, what's the nutrition, what kind of contracts are coming out that are showing that there's nutritional value or education or something like that. Joint Taste Committee. Joint Producer Communications. And then these committees here, like audit, and there's evaluation and budget. Those committees are selected by the elected or the executive committee. So those are some of the changes that have taken place. The other thing that we changed this year was we went through the bylaws. And you remember I showed you that in 1996 or 95, they had 5 amendment changes to the bylaws that created subcommittees. See, prior to that, CBB had their own committees. A subcommittee is allowing the Federation to have input on your committee, which is the other half of NCBA. So why would you have subcommittees? But that was the bylaw change. So this year we went through the bylaws again, and I couldn't get them to drop that. I tried to get them to drop all 5 of those amendments from 96, and I was not successful. But I did get one of them dropped, and I did it as a friendly amendment while we were on the floor having a discussion. That was to drop this idea that we need to have our meetings held with an industry organization. And I did it as a friendly amendment, and it passed, and it no more than passed, and all of a sudden people on the floor realized what happened, and they stood up and started to protest it. Because you see, NCBA lines up the meetings for the CBB, and they line them up 3 years in advance. That way they make sure that you're nice and cozy together when we have these discussions. So if we could get that dropped, maybe we could have a meeting without an industry group. So those are some of the changes. There was an audit that took place because of 2 years ago there was a misappropriation of $400,000. So USDA had conducted an audit, and in the 28th of March, AMS, or the audit on AMS came out, and USDA says that AMS, this is how they're supposed to change the procedure. It was just 2 things. They were supposed to change their internal controls and develop standard operation procedures. That was number 1. Strengthen their internal controls and develop standard operating procedures. And the second thing was to develop guidance to conduct periodic internal reviews of its process in strengthening oversight. Well, that seems like common sense, shouldn't it? But that's what the audit come up with. The other audit was on the Beef Checkoff also. And it didn't come out in March. I mean, they were done with it. So they told us it was going to come out in the summer. And it didn't come out in the summer. It was supposed to come out in the fall. It didn't come out in the fall. So they said, well, it'll come out after the election. There's something in that audit that somebody doesn't want people to know. So they waited till the election before it came, and it still isn't out. So currently there's a lawsuit that Mike Callicrate is the plaintiff on, and all that lawsuit is calling for is the separation of the Federation from NCBA. So that those dollars are not being co-opted by NCBA or by any farm organization. That's what the lawsuit is basically saying. It's saying that the checkoff should stand alone and that the contracts should be done directly with advertising or directly with research. It shouldn't have to go through an organization, because you create another layer of bureaucracy and you create an incredible potential for corruption. So, and that lawsuit's on hold because they're waiting for this audit on the checkoff to be released. I've heard both sides. Some think that there's the checkoff side thinks that the audit will justify them and vindicate them of everything. And the other side, the Cattlecrate side, thinks that they want to wait and see what the audit shows in case it's been whitewashed. And they think if it's been whitewashed, then they'll have grounds for discovery and they'll be able to find out who did it. And so that's why that lawsuit is on hold right now. There's this idea that if we let other people contract, you're going to get some money. You're going to win a contract. Keep NCBA from winning 90-some% of those contracts. So there's Farmers Union, Farm Bureau, U.S. Cattlemen's Association, and RCAF have been in these discussions. And they've kicked RCAF out of the meetings. These other three groups, if they think they're going to win a contract, they're being misled. Currently, there are 5 contractors currently. The NCBA, the USMEF, which is the United States Meat Export Federation, LMPA, which is National Livestock Producers Association. They're like LMA, but for smaller sale barns, I want to say on the East Coast. Then there's MICA, that's the importers. And then there's the National Cattlewomen. There's 5 contractors right now, and NCBA is winning over 90% of those contracts. So if you throw in 3 more contractors, do you think you're going to win a contract? Because NCBA controls that federation. They control 10 of those votes. Now, I served 8 years on the Nebraska Beef Council, and the Nebraska Beef Council collects $10 million a year. $10 million. $2 million, $2.5 million of that is sent back to other states. Their cattle come into the states, so we send it back to those states. So that leaves about $7 million. Of that $7 million, half of it goes to the CBB and half of it stays in the state. So this state currently has a $3.5 million state checkoff. $3.5 million. And our state chooses to send $2.2 million of it to NCBA. So let's give them $10 million. Let's pass a dollar state check off and make it now $10 million. What are we going to do with it? You already got $3.5 million. You're sending $2.25 of it away. What are you going to do with 10? Well, they'll tell you because we'll be able to promote Nebraska beef in foreign countries. Or they'll say, we could give it to national. Is that really what you want? Because what I see happening, several years ago I was in a producer communications meeting when the Beef Checkoff was at the Supreme Court, and they were afraid they were going to lose it. And this idea come about, they said, well, you know what, let's just have each state pass their own state checkoff and then send that money directly to NCBA. We don't need the CBB. Just eliminate them, because that's what, if the checkoff failed at the Supreme Court, that's who would be eliminated. The national level will be gone. California tried to pass a state checkoff last year. It failed. Wyoming tried the year before. It failed. Ohio tried this year. It failed. Nebraska tried in 2006, and it failed, thanks to Ernie Chambers. He stood up and filibustered the bill on the third reading, brought the legislature to a stop, and it kind of died. They all want to increase the beef checkoff. So you might find this interesting, that they want to increase it because they're saying that you don't have the same buying power that you did in 1985. Okay, you've all heard of how surveys are done. They take a small portion of people, ask them questions, and they say, geez, that represents the whole nation. And that always bothered me when I was on producer communications. They'd interview 800 people and say, oh, 78% are in favor. So I thought I'd try the same thing. In Nebraska, what this is this is the brand line. Those states over there have state brand laws. Those cattle cannot cross that state line unless the state inspector inspects those cattle. The act in the order says that those state brand inspectors will collect that checkoff dollar out in the country on country sales. There's no provision for those that don't have checkoff or don't have brand inspection. So I thought, geez, do you realize that in the state of Nebraska, on the east side of that checkoff line, do you know how many dollars we collect on country sales? $4,200. On the other side of that checkoff line, where there are brand inspectors, we collect $450,000. So I thought as a survey, geez, I'll do the whole nation like that. So here it gets interesting. CBB members are based on a number of cattle. And I just randomly drew my line. I left this white because I realized when you get into Nebraska, certain counties will have to deal with the like Antelope and Holt because it runs down the county line. People in Antelope have to deal with the brand inspection because it's so close. So that's why I drew my line like I did. Those states obviously are going to have to deal with something out of the brand inspection. These states here are a whole state removed. So then I did my calculations after I drew my line. 32 beef board members in the brand area. 32 beef board members in the white area. 31 beef board members in the blue area. That's just ironic. That is pretty even split. In the brand area, there's 13 million head of mama cows. In the middle, there's 11 million mama cows, and in the blue area, there's 15 million mama cows. Now here's the interesting thing about mama cows. We collect more than $1 per head. We collect $1 per head on sale every time it's sold. So that animal rolls over I want to say it's 2.5 times. So when you get into a cow-calf area, you're going to collect a checkoff on the calf. You're going to collect a checkoff when you sell that cow. You're going to collect a checkoff when you buy a replacement heifer. And if you keep yearlings, you're going to collect a checkoff on that yearling. When you get into a feeding state, those calves hit the feedlot, and we're told they're not, that's where they set. So there tends to be fewer rolls of the dollar. Just where I'm going, you see where I'm going with this? So we got 13 million out of mama cows, and we're collecting $26 million. We're collecting double the number of cows. These guys are only collecting $1 per head. If you want to raise the checkoff, enforce the law. Just enforce the law. I've talked to brand inspectors on the eastern side of the brand line in Nebraska, and I said, what about when those cattle change hands in a lot? This pin gets sold to another person. They said it's like pulling teeth to get that checkoff dollar out of them guys. So if we'd enforce the law, maybe we'd have more checkoff dollars. But the way it stands right now, I guarantee you them guys in the red are not interested in raising the checkoff. So